Cormagat Cahirlock, and at the outset can I say that Minister Brophy and myself very much welcome the fact that we're going to have a debate and statements on migration here this afternoon. With your permission, Cahirlock, Minister Brophy is going to jointly open the matter with me. I'll probably speak for about 17 minutes or so, and Minister Brophy will speak for the rest of the time. As I said, Cahirlock, I think it's particularly welcome that we are discussing in this House the issue of migration. As you'll be aware, it's an extremely important national and international issue that requires policy decisions and needs the expression of values by political leaders such as ourselves in this House. At the outset, can I say that when we're discussing migration, I think it's important to note that we're not simply discussing emigration or indeed immigration. We're talking about both. If it was the case, Cahirlock, that we were here 60 years ago and the topic of migration was on the agenda of Dáil Éireann, I suspect we'd be talking about the terrible emigration that took place in Ireland for very many years. Today, however, we are also talking about emigration, as statistics for last year revealed that approximately up to 70,000 people, I think, emigrated, left Ireland last year. But of course, the more predominant type of migration now is immigration. We saw last year that approximately 150,000 people immigrated into Ireland. I suppose at the outset we should say that that's an indication of the transformation in the success of Ireland as a country. For far too many years, we lived on an island where people were forced to leave because of economic circumstances in order to get a sustainable life. The fact that that now has been transformed and more people want to come into Ireland than to leave Ireland really is a reflection on the success of Ireland as a country. The reason people want to come here is because there are opportunities for them in Ireland, and it is recognised as a safe, peaceful and successful country with a very strong economy. Can I just also reflect that when we're talking about migration, we need to put it in context. And I think the context has to be what's the demographic context in respect of our population. As I said a few moments ago, Cahirlock, if you and I were back in Ireland in 1841 and we filled out the census, we'd find out after filling it that the population of the island of Ireland back in 1841 was 8.2 million people. Tragically, we went through the seminal event in Irish history in the 1840s with the Irish famine, and in the aftermath of the famine, over 1 million people died, but very many millions in future generations emigrated from Ireland and went abroad. That resulted in us finding ourselves in 1960 with our population still in decline. Population of Ireland back in 1960 was 2.8 million when you include Northern Ireland, which was partitioned a number of years earlier. You can see that the population was 4.3 million. Even today, when you look at the population of the Republic, we have a population now of around 5.4 million, and when you include Northern Ireland, it gets us up to around 7.3 million. So today, when so many people want to come to the country and are in the country, we're still in a position where Ireland is not as populated today as an island as it was back in 1841. And I think that is something that we need to reflect on. I need to recognise that the drop in our population was a reflection of very negative times in Ireland, and the rise in our population is to a large extent a reflection of the success of Ireland. Can I also say that part of the reason that Minister Brophy and myself wanted this topic on the agenda for the first week of the Dáil's return was because both Minister Brophy and myself were very concerned and indeed appalled at what we saw during a number of instances during the summer months where members of our migrant community were attacked. Now, I had the opportunity, as did Minister Brophy, to meet with representatives of the Indian community, and it's fair to say that they were very shook by the incidents that occurred. They were very offended by it, and they, when meeting me, were wondering what was it that they had done, or indeed any migrant had done, to merit such a criminal and appalling attack. I, of course, emphasised to them that in my assessment that the Irish people are very welcoming of the people who have come into this country. And I, at the outset, along with Minister Brophy, want to emphasise that migrants who are in this country lawfully are extremely welcome in this country. It is very important that that message is got out there. Similarly, another important message that both of us want to communicate, however, is that when it comes to immigration, we have a rules-based system. And in order to come into Ireland, you have to comply with the rules, and if you comply with the rules, you're extremely welcome here. But if you don't comply with the rules, we just have to enforce the rules to ensure that we keep control over our migration system. I reflect upon the fact, Cathaoirleach, that I suppose in our hospitals at present, I think it's approximately 15% of all nurses and midwives that are working in Irish hospitals at present come from India. And we have a very significant number of people working in our health service who play a significant role. And it's worth pointing out that in 2023, more than 23% of all nurses and midwives directly employed by the HSE were migrants. And as I say, nearly 15% of them came from India. It's also worthwhile pointing out that in 2023, nearly 4 in every 10 doctors registered with the Irish Medical Council were trained outside Ireland, and 1 in 4 were trained outside the UK and the EU. I suppose these numbers illustrate, Cathaoirleach, that the health service is very much dependent on the excellent work provided by migrants who have come to Ireland to work here. It's not just our health system, however, that is dependent upon migrants who have come here to work. If you look at our construction sector, you'll note that there was a statistics produced in 2023 which showed that in that year there were 27,500 migrant workers in Ireland's construction sector. And that's a significant increase on what it was a number of years beforehand. On many occasions, I'm in this House answering questions about when prisons or Garda stations or indeed houses are going to be constructed. We can't construct that level of infrastructure unless we have workers here, and that's why it is important to acknowledge that very many of the workers who are involved in the construction business in Ireland are migrants who have come here to work. But of course, that leaves aside the very many people who have come here from other countries to work in our booming technology sector and in the multinational sector that is so happily based here throughout the country. So in terms of the contribution that migrants have made to Irish society, I think it is important to emphasise that people who are here lawfully make an extremely strong contribution and are welcomed by the vast majority of Irish people. Obviously, migration can give rise to challenges as well. And one of the big challenges that a government faces, and indeed political leaders in the House we all face, is to try to ensure that migrants who come into the country are fully and adequately integrated. We've seen, regrettably, in other countries what happens when migrants who come into the country are not integrated and feel as though they are a separate group within the country. That is not good for society, it is not good for migrants, and it would not be good for the, I suppose, the Irish population as a whole. And I suppose for that reason, I think it's important to emphasise that Minister Brophy and myself are currently working on a national migration and integration strategy. It will set out how this government intends to meet the opportunities and demands facing our society and economy over the next decade. It's important to point out, Cathaoirleach, this is the first time such a strategy has been undertaken. And I and Minister Brophy are determined that our approach to migration is rules-based, it's planned and it is coherent. Can I just emphasise the reason why I think it is so important that we have a rules-based system and we apply a rules-based system. If you don't have a rules-based system, you have a discretionary system that is based upon ministerial viewpoint or executive decision. And that will necessarily end up being a system that the public cannot properly understand and cannot properly supervise and see how it operates. It's extremely important, therefore, that we have a system of rules in place in Ireland that indicate when you're entitled to come to Ireland, how long you're entitled to stay in Ireland, and what are the consequences if you overstay your welcome. I'm not aware of any country in the world, Cathaoirleach, which doesn't have a rules-based system that needs to be applied when it comes to migration. I also think it's extremely important that we let the word get out that we do have a rules-based system. As people in this House will know, and nobody knows this better than constituency TDs, there are people in this country who want to exploit the position of immigration in this country for their own political purposes. We need to stand up to that. My own view is that the best way to stand up to it is through facts and by being able to state we have a rules-based system, and if people comply with those rules, they gain entry. If they don't comply with the rules, they have to leave. Once we have those rules in place, I think it is much easier to defend the system, and the public are very concerned to know that the government and Minister, namely myself and Minister Brophy, are in charge and have a recognition that the system is being applied effectively. The challenges, I suppose, as I mentioned at the outset, derive to a large extent from population. The numbers immigrating into Ireland are small in the context of, say, a country such as Germany or France. But I suppose we are a small country which has, as I say at present, a population of approximately 5.4 million. We also have a tendency sometimes just to reflect on a certain element when it comes to immigration, ignoring the fact that most migration into Ireland derives from those who have been granted a visa to come here lawfully. Can I just at the outset, Cahirla, just give some statistics in respect of where we are at present in terms of Ireland's population. As I said, our population has recovered significantly and has been growing since 1960. Notwithstanding that, that is giving rise to challenges because in the last number of years, our population has been growing at an extremely fast rate. In fact, our population at present is growing at 7 times the EU average, which is very significant. The effect of it is that in the year up to April 2024, the population of Ireland increased by approximately 98,700 people in a period of 12 months. And that's a very significant population growth. And that growth derives from the following. We had a birth rate of 54,200 in the year up to April 2024. We had a death rate of 34,800 up to the end of April 2024. We also had immigration into Ireland of 149,000 people. And can I just break down that 149,000 people? It's important that we have the context in terms of the demographics for the discussion that we're having this afternoon. 30,000 of the 149,000 people who immigrated into Ireland were Irish citizens who were returning. 27,000 were EU citizens. 5,400 were UK citizens, and 86,800 people were from other countries. So that's the 149,000 people who immigrated into Ireland in the year ending April 2024. Similarly, we also had 69,000 people who left the country during that 12-month period. And of that, 34,700 were Irish citizens, 27,000 were EU citizens, 5,400 were UK citizens, and 21,500 were citizens from other countries. So it's important that we get that demographic context out there for the purpose of discussing migration. And as I say, it is a positive news story that in Ireland we have changed the narrative from people leaving the country, having to go elsewhere to get their successful life, to people who now want to come into Ireland. And the reason they want to come in is because we are a very successful country and a very successful economy. The majority of the people who come into Ireland come in on the basis of visas that have been granted by my department. And in 2024, there were approximately 201,000 applications of all types that were received by the Department of Justice. And of that 201,000 applications, 150,000 visas were granted. Now, very many of those visas are short-term visas, Cahirla. Some of them are 9-month visas, but there was also a significant number which are student visas. There was approximately 61,000 student permissions, as I call them, that were issued in 2024. And to date, in 2025, there are more applications that are coming in terms of visa-sought migration. The Department of Justice has got much more efficient in considering and processing visa applications, and I'm pleased to say it's much faster than it was. Nonetheless, each visa application has to be considered carefully. I know sometimes this can create annoyance in the House here, and deputies frequently come to me asking me, can you speed up a visa application? I have no objection to people doing that, by the way, it's part of my function. But it does those people need to recognise that there is a process in place, it's a rules-based system, and those rules need to be applied. So the main type of migration into Ireland, as I say, is visa-granted migration, and I've given the statistics there. There's two other types of migration into Ireland which I suppose have got significant attention in recent times. And the first of them is temporary protection. As you'll be aware, for the first time when Russia invaded Ukraine back in 2022, the European Union triggered the Temporary Protection Directive. The effect of that was that individuals who left Ukraine after the date of that war and who went to another EU country could apply for temporary protection. If they received temporary protection, it would entitle them to apply for access to accommodation and give them access to the workforce as well. We have seen that since the war in Ukraine, approximately 114,000 beneficiaries of temporary protection have arrived in Ireland. They've been granted temporary protection here. The number has declined noticeably since those people arrived, and now at present there's approximately 80,000 PPS numbers remain active for beneficiaries of temporary protection. That's as of March 2025. So that's one type of migration into Ireland, which is temporary protection. Then there is international protection applications, Cathaoirleach, and that's probably the type of migration that gets most of the coverage, even though it only accounts for not small, but a limited percentage of the numbers of people arriving in Ireland. It is true to say that in recent years, the number of people applying for international protection in Ireland has increased significantly. And if I can just give you some of the statistics here, because I think, again, it's important for the context of this debate. In 2019, 4,700 people arrived in seeking international protection in Ireland. Obviously, during the COVID years of 2020 and 2021, the numbers were small at 1,500 and 2,600. But then in 2022, 2023, we had 13,500 people applying for international protection in each of those years. And last year, 18,500 people applied. Now, the numbers have reduced this year, but the consequence of high numbers of people coming in seeking international protection is that there is an obligation on the state, as there is on other EU countries, to provide accommodation for persons who are coming in here. And that has been a politically contentious issue and has given rise to concern in communities. I know Minister Brophy is going to speak in a bit of detail about that issue in terms of the accommodation. But there is a policy in the Department at present to try to reduce the costs of international protection accommodation. The main way of doing that, Cathaoirleach, and we can't sugarcoat it any other way, is we need to get the numbers of people arriving into Ireland claiming asylum, we need to get those numbers down. And I say that, you know, in the knowledge that of the people who've arrived in 2025 who've claimed asylum, over 80% have been rejected in the first instance. So, like, we need to recognise that fact. I'll hand over to Minister Brophy now.